I mean, certainly that in June's book, and it's really interesting to look at her death in another way because, of course, it's always traditionally said that it is childbed fever. And, I mean, I tend to think it may well have been, but, actually it's interesting to look at other suggestions, and certainly there are some rumours that he's had a hand in it. Elizabeth's governess, for example, Princess Elizabeth's governess informs her that her old suitor is free to marry her when Katherine Parr dies, which is quite a strange thing to say when your beloved stepmother has just dropped dead.
But it's not just... I mean, there are other reasons as to why there was suspicion surrounding how she came to meet her death. What's your...
the main suspicion comes in the only written account we have of Catherine's death, which comes from a woman called Elizabeth Tyrwhitt, who was with Catherine at Sudeley in the last months of her life.
So Sudeley Castle,
in Gloucestershire, is where Catherine ended up. So it's a beautiful castle in the middle of... There it is, in the middle of these rolling hills. And Catherine goes there with Thomas about 3 or 4 months before their baby is due. So she marries Thomas.
She goes there to prepare herself in preparation for birth, yeah.
So, as you said, she was the barren queen, the queen who was not going to produce a baby, and then she marries Thomas.
She was 35 at this time?
Yes, she was. So she was, certainly in Tudor times, old to be having her first child, but she becomes pregnant.
Listen,
and
even today, she'd be called a geriatric mum. I speak as one.
Oh, no, I've had that label applied as well. It always brings a smile to your face. Another thing for you to worry about.
Yeah.
But she's pregnant, and so they go off to Sudeley to have the baby. So she arrives there about 3-4 months before the baby is due to be born. And with her is her household, and it's a big household, and Thomas has had Sudeley Castle done up to befit a queen and a queen's daughter, because although he is the father of her child, the child she's going to have is a queen's child, and is a very important person, really, in the makeup of Tudor society. So she arrives there with her household. Her baby's born on August the 30th, 1548, and then the only written account that we have of Catherine's death comes from her lady-in-waiting, who went into her on the morning of September the 3rd and says she found Catherine in a terrible state, saying she was about to die. And this seems to come as a terrible surprise to her. She wasn't expecting to hear this. And she says
because she'd been well in advance of that.
Yeah, there didn't seem to be any indication that she'd suffered any ill effects from childbirth and was making what would be termed a normal recovery. She'd be expected to be, in her chambers for another number of weeks, but everything seemed to be going well at that point. And so Elizabeth Tyrwhitt says she went into her, and Catherine is telling her that she's about to die. She fears terrible things about herself, and she starts to point the finger at Thomas Seymour. She says that he's used her badly. He wouldn't let her own doctor attend her, and she describes this scene where Thomas Seymour sits with Catherine, who starts to kind of rant and rave about him. So we have this almost contemporaneous account of her death in which someone who was there in her final hours said she pointed the finger at her husband. Now,
was she impartial? Does she like Thomas?
No, she doesn't. She's very close to Catherine. She's a very religious woman and will publish her own book on Protestant religion. She's not keen on Thomas. I mean, most of Catherine's friends aren't very keen on Thomas.
I was going to say, she's not alone in that. Nobody's sat in the background going, shame, because we really like him.
He's such a great guy. And I think as well, it's important to remember that this written account we have of Catherine's death actually comes as part of the evidence that was being gathered against Thomas Seymour, because by the beginning of 1549, everyone had had enough of him, and he was behaving so erratically. He was absolutely out of control, and they wanted rid of him. So they were gathering as much evidence as they could to prove.
So this also suited that narrative.
Exactly.
Well, the thing is about the mythology of death, it's written by the living. So those that survive and live and become strong are those who write the words about the past. And so we have this fear in the Tudor dynasty that it's going to come to an end. And I think to understand that, we've got to try and understand how the Tudor dynasty began. It began in exactly the same way that Thomas Seymour was attempting to interfere in the Tudor family. It began by sort of a relatively obscure Welsh horsemaster marrying a French queen, and then their descendants claiming, the Tudor dynasty, and then them coming in and usurping. And that seems to be what Thomas Seymour is attempting to do.
So his playbook was not an original...
It's not an original playbook. Yeah. And people feel that, this is a man who has stepped beyond his station. He's gone beyond his station. He's seeing himself as a potential king.
Totally. Well, he was, literally trying every route possible to that. What about the fact that her death wasn't recorded? I mean, she's the Queen of England. surely it would be a matter of record that she has passed away. Does that not arouse suspicion?
I think she's one of the rare examples in royal history. There isn't that much written evidence around what happened to her in her final days, how she died, when she died, even her funeral. And I think that's what makes it such a strange royal death. At the time Catherine died, what we call registration is really in its infancy. I mean, it was literally a few years since it was decreed that you could write down what had happened in parish churches. So you would record a christening and a wedding and a funeral. You weren't recording a birth or a death. You were recording the events in the church. But it was really only for the kind of highborn. No one really kept records of you know, most people's lives. There's no census, there's no records. So, but you would expect the only queen in England at the time, which is what she was, because Anne of Cleves wasn't given the title of queen. She was off living her best life, just watching from the sidelines, thinking, glad I'm out of that.
Going like that, still here?
Yeah, it's still here.
Still there.
And it's gone. Fantastic. We're fine. She's the only queen in England, and yet we have Elizabeth Towet's recollections of what happened, which were gathered in as part of the evidence against Thomas Seymour. We've got one record for the College of Arms of Catherine's funeral, and that's it. She disappears from history. Now, when you think of other kings and queens, they're the few people that you've got records of their deaths. And usually, at this time, a royal death, it's a big event. You'd expect her coffin to be processed around cities and towns, or back to London, back to Windsor, somewhere grand. And they wrap her up in 14 layers of cerecloth and a very tight lead coffin and carry her about 200 yards and chuck her in a tomb, and that's it. You know, she's the Queen of England.
And this all happened very quickly, right?
2 days, 48 hours.
48 hours.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably questionable whether Edward VI and the royal court even knew that she was dead by the time she was buried.
It's not like anybody could phone somebody, right?
Exactly.
How do you get news out?
They've got to send a messenger by horse to London to say the Queen is dead. Thomas Seymour leaves as soon as she's dead. He's gone. He's not hanging around. He's got other fish to fry.
It's not the act of a man deep in grief, is it?
You wouldn't expect a husband. Husbands didn't go to the funerals. There's all this different paraphernalia of death in Tudor times. But Thomas leaves Sudeley almost instantly.
Why?
It is quite strange behaviour. And, I mean, the whole funeral, I mean, and reading the book really brought it home just how rapid it is, in that, I mean, she would have been expected to be buried at Windsor, where Henry VIII is. He's left space for her in the vault. He's there with Jane Seymour, his third wife. Henry VIII's funeral is full of the banners of Jane Seymour and Katherine Parr. She's clearly intended for the vault at Windsor, and yet there's no attempt.
And there she is, at Sudeley. Mm-hmm. Literally, they didn't even take her out of the grounds.
She was, yeah, I mean, she was...
They put her in the ground.
It's 200 yards. I mean, it's a walk round the corner. It's
also not a place that she had a huge history with. Sudeley was relatively a new build.
It was.
And this is...
Well, that could be a benefit. If you wish her to become part of the past and not to be remembered, then it can be useful that she gets buried there.
So do you think that there's something suspicious around
I think that the obscuring of her name was in the benefit and for the purpose of a number of people. So it's not just one person who would think, OK, let's keep her life a secret, let's keep her success a secret. Edward, you know, Mary, Elizabeth, all could have reasons not to promote this particular queen.